Hello and welcome to episode 52 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is August 14th, 2017. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me is Slappy Jones 2, and we are both at McFlugel.com. The show notes page for this episode is McFlugel.com/52, where you'll be able to find links to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, sign up for the newsletter we have, and also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, all that good stuff. So I'm going to hand it right over to Slappy Jones, and he's going to introduce our topic and also our guest for this episode.
Thank you, Rollo. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Today, we have a guest with us, Jeremiah Harding. He's an anarchist, conspiracy theorist, writer, podcaster, does it all. And we are talking about Gary Johnson. We often refer to ourselves as libertarian, or we talk about the libertarian movement. But you probably noticed we really don't talk politics too much, not really into it. And if you're listening to us and not really into the libertarian movement, that could be confusing to you. There's a libertarian party. Why aren't we pumping them up? So we're going to talk a little bit about Gary Johnson. So first, welcome to the show, Jeremiah.
Hey, glad to be here.
So let's get right into it with Gary Johnson. We being libertarians, we don't like to use the collectivist terms, but hey, we had an opportunity this year. We had Donald Trump nominated for the Republicans. Hillary Clinton stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders. A lot of hope in the libertarian movement that we would nominate someone who could spread the message, do a great job, get people fired up, and we got Gary Johnson. So how did that happen?
Well, I mean, politics happened, realistically. He's not scary, and that's the thing people wanted. They wanted somebody, some people. They wanted somebody who wasn't scary. They wanted somebody who was going to do exactly the sort of baseline politics that wouldn't freak anybody out, because like the rest of the people in the libertarian ticket were either more extreme or at least more zealous than Johnson. But Johnson was picked because he wasn't scary. He was just normal and blasé, and he was closer to the politics as usual of like the Trump or the Hillary. So that if they were going to scrape votes, the leadership decided to pick him. You know, that's my theory anyway. They wanted somebody who wasn't extreme, which is the opposite of what they actually needed.
Well, I think actually calling him normal is somewhat of a compliment. I thought he was very sleep-inducing every time he talked. Very boring.
Well, that is normal, though. I mean, Hillary was a murdering criminal, overlord lady, and Trump was a business mogul who talked a lot of shit and held his own. Can't stump the Trump. Those two people weren't normal, and he was. That's the problem.
It's funny you put it that way, because in politics, I mean, Hillary is the status quo. I mean, she was the John McCain in a pantsuit.
Yeah,
and that's what's normal, and that's absolutely disgusting, because they're both war criminals.
But the point of
crimes against humanity.
But the point of Hillary being not normal is the way that she approached that. She didn't talk about her bombings. She didn't talk about her no-fly zones. She didn't talk about Benghazi. She didn't talk about emails. She didn't talk about servers. She didn't talk about scandals and Pizzagate. The only thing she did was try to maintain a front of, I'm still better than Trump. And all Trump had to do was prove that she wasn't. That's not necessarily normal. That's more like, mob-style protection tactics, Hey, you could have your freedom, but you could have, us. And you could, by that I mean you will have us, because you're not going to have anybody else but us. You see, we're even friends with Trump.
Yeah.
That sort of mentality.
Yeah. I mean,
you had to have, the theater. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. Yeah, and Gary Johnson, I mean, he might have not been a war criminal, but just what bothered me so there's just over and over again on whenever he would get national attention, like the Aleppo thing. What is Aleppo? He butchers that, and then he forgets. I don't even. What was he talking about? He didn't know how to answer a question. I think it was about
Baking cakes.
No, it was when
principle.
He got so many slam dunk questions that if you knew anything about libertarianism, should have been just slam dunk answers. He got asked. I think it was Chris Matthews asked him his favorite foreign leader, and he couldn't think of anyone. And as a libertarian, you should not be able to think of anyone because your answer as a libertarian would be, I think all all leaders, as in rulers, are against what I believe in, so I don't look up to any of them. I think they're the problem. Instead, he can't think of anything, and he goes, oh, I'm having an Aleppo moment. It's like, why would you bring up Aleppo again? It's just, I mean, take that AR-15 and shoot it right in your foot. It wasn't just a handgun. He, took the. It's just he was just atrocious. He did the thing with sticking his tongue out when he was talking to try to say like whatever. Like I don't know what he was doing. It's just, oh, he was so bad. Go ahead, Slappy.
No, I was going to say what I was disappointed in is, I mean, no one thought the Libertarian candidate was going to win, but we thought maybe we could get someone who would make some noise and get some followers. And in my experience, I haven't seen anyone jump into the Liberty movement and say Gary Johnson brought me here. Now, I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm sure there's some, but have you seen any of this, of people joining in like they did with Ron Paul?
But it was like,
for Gary Johnson.
If I would say so, like 5% of the people that I've seen involved in Libertarian Party politics who were drawn in by Gary Johnson, and that's really fucking low numbers. That's like fucking incrementally lower than Trump approval ratings, and that's not how you win. Is being lower than Trump current approval ratings and the amount of people that you can bring over.
Yeah, if you're not doing better than Trump, then you shouldn't be bragging or anything. I really only could think of one person that I knew that was like a big Gary Johnson guy. When I kind of not confronted him, but pushed him on a little bit, he goes, yeah, I know he's not really a libertarian, but he's the best that we got. So
does he use a pocket protector?
You should use a brain protector.
No, I'm saying like the people that like support Gary Johnson, I imagine them to be like who would use a pocket protector and wear khakis regularly.
Like some guy who works in an oil refinery as an engineer.
but I don't hey, maybe so, but
pocket protector.
Maybe
so, but if he drives a tractor, then that takes him out of that. Yeah.
So, what about Bill Weld? Everyone liked
gun
that
grabber,
nomination,
motherfucker.
Right? Yeah. So I don't know how the Libertarian Party works nationally. How did these guys get nominated? Do you know the process, or do you know how this happened? Was there a lot of politicking, buying votes?
Well, the nomination didn't happen until the end of the last debate, and in the end of the last debate, most of the support was going to McAfee and Peterson. Most of the support, and that's the time when you realize that the nomination wasn't controlled by the bulk of the Libertarian Party, but rather by interests in basically the nomination board. Like it was like the Hillary thing, and it was like the Ron Paul thing. But in the Libertarian Party, and in a party that's supposed to divorce itself from politics as usual, that's not wise. You should be better than the competition, because you're trying to prove that the competition is what's created a system that needs a fundamental overhaul, and that's not what the fuck they did. They picked Gary Johnson after a debate where he lost, smashing defeat, and happened because of the quote votes that certain I think they do a delegation process, and I think that the people who were selected to be the voters for this sort of thing, they didn't want the other people in because they were more extreme. Even Austin Peterson, who's fucking milquetoast and who says that the NAP is a libertarian suicide pact. He said that to me.
Yeah, I've heard it.
I wrote an article
and
about.
It's fucking awful.
Yeah, I wrote an article about that, and he responded on Facebook, and it was just verbal diarrhea coming out of his mouth. It was terrible. But yeah, well, speaking of the non-aggression principle, as bad as Austin Peterson got it, I mean, I was at the libertarian debate in Philadelphia, and I was sitting there in the audience. They're going through this stuff. I said, I'm sitting here. I got a YouTube channel, a blog. Maybe I should record some of this. So I put my phone up, hit record, and Larkin Rose asked the question, is the non-aggression principle compatible with the Constitution? Daryl Perry, they ask him the question first, and he just nails it. Nails the answer from a libertarian perspective, says it's not. Goes into some...
Well, he quotes Spooner.
Yes, yeah. Says it's either not designed...
It either doesn't work or it's designed to fail.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Either way, it's unfit to exist. So he just absolutely very concise. Probably said it, gave his answer in under 30 seconds. It was great. And that's when I was like, oh wow, because I didn't know who Daryl Perry was before that. And I was like, oh wow, this guy actually is good. And then it goes.
He runs a.
Go ahead.
He runs a show.
Yes.
On SoundCloud, a libertarian show.
Yeah, but he was excellent the whole debate, and he's very principled and very good. And I was like, oh man, I mean, he was the real deal. And then it goes over to Gary Johnson, and I just had the biggest smile on my face because I'm like, I'm recording him saying this stuff. It's like the non-aggression principle just goes over my head, and I talk to people about it, and their eyes glaze over, it just goes over my head. Like, how the non-aggression principle, and I don't believe the non-aggression principle is axiomatic. I do. Well, I take the Michael Huemer approach.
Let's go into that a little bit.
Yeah, there's some. It's prima facie correct, and I define it more as people have the prima facie right to be free from harmful coercion. So if you're like on I think there's certain lifeboat scenarios that you'd be justified in committing some aggression just to get yourself out of that situation. They're very rare, and I think you could argue that they would never actually exist.
Like what?
Let's say you're on a lifeboat. Say you and I are on a lifeboat, and the boat springs a leak, and the only way that you would be able to survive is if we both bail the water out. But I decide for whatever reason that I don't want to bail the water out. Would you be justified in threatening some sort of harm to get me to bail the water out in order to save your life?
Well, if you're going to the boat that's causing the boat to sink faster and you won't bail the water out because, you're lazy or something, then you're part of the reason that the boat is sinking, and you're none of the reason that it will stay afloat. And so since you're not contributing to the safety of others and you're actively contributing to the danger of others, I would say that quantifies not bailing the water out as the aggressor. And I would say that anything responding to that would be defensive force, because you're pushing the boat down and you're helping it sink, and you're not helping us stay afloat. So it's sort of like holding somebody's head underwater. Well, I didn't kill him, the water did. That's horse shit. You did kill him. You killed the person on the other end because you didn't bail out the water. You're an aggressor.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's I
I
think
like
of it that way, but that's a good response.
I like that response.
I have other lifeboat scenarios if you want to go.
How about?
Yeah, sure. Let's knock down some lifeboats.
Try some. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this. Do you have one, Slappy?
No, go for it.
Okay, so there's let's say Slappy's drowning in a lake, and you and I are standing on the shore, and for whatever reason, this is just the scenario that exists. We need both of us in order to save him, and there's no other way to save him. And I say,
why is he drowning?
I don't know. I guess he was out. I don't know. I guess because
that's the interesting question.
let's say, and this might be unfair of me, but let's say that it was not his fault. He was drowning. It was no one's fault that he was drowning.
Okay, but
I don't know if that's fair.
in
Like
what
I said,
circumstance?
He was on a boat in the water,
Yeah.
and a large animal bumped it, tipped it over,
and the boat went away, and
and sunk or something. I
Yeah,
don't know.
let's
It's an
say-
absurd scenario,
let's
but
say the boat sunk. Again, and I want to qualify these lifeboat scenarios as I don't think that because the whole point of this is that there has to be no other option in order for it to be true, which in normal life there's
Okay, well, if it's nobody's fault, then the aggressor isn't there. It's an unfavorable situation, but there is no aggressor. So the aggressor would then start possibly at the solution to it, but not saving somebody is not an act of aggression. And if it is, then there's a huge amount of suffering that the entire world is aggressing by not ameliorating, which, at that point, like, when the capability is within your hands to do something, if not doing anything is aggression, if it constitutes an act of aggression, then by that token, if Slappy had a gun while he was drowning and the one person wouldn't help, then he would be justified in shooting that person for an act of aggression that would cost him his life. That's, to me, it's an absurd application of the term aggression to insist that that there is an aggression to prevent here, and it would certainly be an aggressive act to put either you or I in the water if you or I didn't consent, and an unreasonable act in that manner, because not preventing somebody's death, while it's a move that will probably result in some negative feedback from one party or another, it's not actually a crime, and so it's not something that should be prosecutable, or that should be, somebody should be forced into not committing. Like, if that's the case, then everybody should be conscripted to whatever military exists to protect the country, and everybody should have to serve in the police or the firefighters or as an EMT to save lives, because if they don't, then they're not actively contributing to the safety of others when they could, and it would be unethical. I think that if we're going to have a stable ethical system, that we need to have certain boundaries on what we consider ethical and what we consider not. And that if we're just talking about aggression versus non-aggression, the case is pretty clear cut here. It would be wrong to force somebody else into the water to help somebody else out. But that being said, most people, if they knew with relative certainty that they could help somebody save somebody, that they would probably do. People aren't fundamentally good, but they are interested in seeming good to others. And if they can pass that story around that they saved somebody's life today or last week or whatever, if they can possibly make a new contact or have somebody owe them one, there's always the possible benefits from it. So I would say that an aggressive scenario wouldn't even be necessary there. I know personally that even though I'm not a very good swimmer, I would probably accept that call to action there if I could help somebody live.
Oh yeah.
And just to be clear, I agree completely that it wouldn't need a gun to someone's head to go out and jump in the water to save someone. And also, I'm not claiming that it's an act of aggression to let someone drown.
Well, right. So, but I'm saying that because an act of aggression isn't there, there's no need to have a violent response to it. And like shoving somebody else in the water and threatening their life as well. Let's say that, you or I aren't a very good swimmer and we might drown if we go out and try and save somebody. That happens a lot. I think it's like a third of the people who try and save somebody that get fucked up as a result. And to me, my answer to the whole situation is both people absolutely, they absolutely should, from a good human being standpoint, do that, especially since if a society of people were built around that sort of action, helping their neighbor when their neighbor was in need, then that society could survive with less or no government. But that doesn't mean that I would force them to, because I don't want to be a shitty person and force somebody to try and save a life that they have no obligation to. Not to say that you don't have an obligation to slap you or whatever. I don't know what you two owe each other, but like the primary thing here is that I don't want to be the same kind of thing that I'm trying to prevent, which is what the non-aggression principle and in my form axiom is, because it's trying to make the world better by personal action. So, I mean, this lifeboat scenario doesn't strike me as one that I would honestly give too much of a shit about. Like, if somebody doesn't want to help somebody, I'll watch the guy drown and try not to have too little sleep that night.
Yeah, and to be fair to Michael Huemer, because he did qualify it as it's understood that there would be no harm given to the people that went out and tried to save the drowning person.
Well, no harm except the harm to their sovereignty. I think
right. I meant like there's
he does say it's an act of aggression. He just says it's permissible.
Yeah.
I wouldn't permit that shit. Get the fuck off my property. You're gonna force people into the water.
So do you say, are there any rights other than property rights?
Positive rights? I don't think that there are positive rights. I think property rights are a negation of terms. I think I have the right to not have my property aggressed upon, if that's what you mean.
That's what I mean. I agree. So how about the cabin in the woods scenario?
Okay, which one?
So yeah, you're starving. You come across a hunting lodge in the middle of the woods. However you got there, you're lost. You can't get out. You can't get help. Is it permissible to break in and get food if you know it's there, or do you have to sit outside and starve?
In the woods? Why am I starving in the woods?
I don't know. You got lost.
It's not Jeremiah. It's one of these.
It's Slappy who can't find his way out of the woods. And it's your hunting lodge, and I'm out there starving, and I've been out there for days. I'm cold.
It's my hunting lodge then?
Yes.
You're asking me, like, okay, so for the purposes of this exercise, you're putting me in the proverbial hot seat, and you're saying, like, how would I respond?
Well, yeah, sure, but really it's my act. So I come across the lodge, I look in the window, I knock on the door, there's no one there, no one's answering. It's, a lodge you use here and there when you go hunting. But I see a refrigerator, or I see, whatever, a box of cereal on top of the fridge. And yeah, I don't know. So
yeah, but there's some nice cabbage in there.
Yeah. So I break in and I take the food. Now, what I have to do afterwards, I mean, I think, well, I'll let you respond. Do you think I was wrong to do that?
Yes, but if it's my hunting lodge and you tell me you were starving, what I'll demand you do is you work off the damages to my property, and I'll also say that you need to learn from me some basic survival and bushcraft skills so that you don't have to do this again and you can find your way out of the woods. Yeah, well, I'll give you a service so that you don't have to be encountered with this again, but absolutely it was wrong.
And for the record, I won't be lost in the woods because I won't go in them, because I would not be able to survive in the woods on my own. So
you should just learn how to make a compass. That makes everything so much easier. Like a stick in the ground.
So I don't know if you were going to take the scenario this way, but what if there was a sign on the cabin that said, "Under no circumstances whatsoever is anyone allowed to break in"?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. It's still wrong,
right?
But if it's my cabin, if you ever decide to do this, hope you have somebody reasonable that responds to you, and not somebody who's going to come around the corner with PTSD and a double barrel. So
certainly, I agree. I mean, ultimately, it's still an aggression, and that person would be responsible to compensate the owner for that aggression.
Right, but it's not permissible. That's the thing about it, is that you can shoulder the costs of fucking with somebody, but it's ultimately your decision, and you should understand that they have an ethical basis to fuck with you in return. And I don't even believe in proportional force, because I don't think it's reasonable to ask somebody to understand the energetic cost of what they did, and only get that much in response, because I don't think anybody can truly know the costs of an action. So I wouldn't be upset if a trespasser in the middle of the woods in a hunting lodge that he broke into got a double barrel to the face. That wouldn't bother me ethically.
Because the owner has no idea what he's in there for. So I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Even if he knew he was there because he was lost, if you heard the guy knocking around, "Please, I'm lost," that doesn't matter. It's still wrong. Because it's threatening the sanctity of somebody else's property that they could use to keep safe. Maybe a bear followed Slappy to my hunting lodge, and because he broke in through the front door, there's now a bear in my house destroying it. It's unreasonable to call it anything less than wrong and aggression and say that it's unpermissible until the person decides, this was a reasonable reason to break in or whatever. But and I would do that. I would find a way that we could all, after I got done with my anger, because I have bipolarism and some severe anger problems. After I got done with my anger, I would probably try to find a way to correct the situation that ended up with both people being better for it. He works off the damages to my property, and I teach him something, and then some, because it's costing me fucking time to deal with this new situation. And I teach him how to survive in the future so that he doesn't have to worry about that. Maybe we exchange numbers, and he comes up and learns survivalism from me for a fee in the future. Maybe we become best friends. That shit happens. The idea of a libertarian society would probably require some very reasonable people owning property. And the idea of a libertarian person, whether the society is libertarian or not, needs to be the idea of somebody who understands that not all circumstances will go their way, and that maybe they should be rational about things instead of taking the most knee-jerk, violent approach that gets memes made about it for Facebook. So, there's multiple layers to it. But one of the primary layers to it needs to be an understanding that it is definitely wrong, and that it should in no circumstances be considered permissible. Permission should only come from property owners. It should only come from the people who have the right to issue permits. So I don't see a purpose in calling it permissible or allowable or whatever. I mean, like Stefan Molyneux, he constantly talks about permissible and preferable. And it's, I guess, permissible and preferable, but we have to consider who permits it and who prefers it. Because the only people who can permit and prefer something rationally in an ethical society are the people who have rightful dominion over the thing in question. And so, it'd be wrong, but I'd try to be reasonable about it, because I don't like killing people that aren't aggressors in a very serious sense,
Yeah, and I think that's the most important takeaway that I completely agree with, is that you have to be reasonable. It's because even if whether we agree or disagree on these lifeboat scenarios, cabin in the woods scenarios, you have to take a step back and be like, all right, well, these situations exist. How's the best way to get out of it? Because as libertarians, as anarchists, we don't say that it's going to be utopia and then all our problems are going to be solved if we just don't have the state. There's going to be plenty of situations where there's a conflict, where there's a problem. How do you get out of it? By causing the least amount of harm.
Well, I don't even think by causing the least amount of harm, because if somebody's a serial rapist, I might not mind torturing them for a few months before I kill them.
Well, I meant for people that aren't explicit aggressors for the sake of, I don't even know how to put it.
Overt.
Yes. Yeah, like someone who's out, whose goal is to do harm.
A serial rapist.
Right. Whose goal out there is to just do harm to people.
Yeah.
Those people, I mean, kind of, I don't want to say all bets are off, because I think but it's a different situation.
They sacrifice their human rights. I have no problem saying all bets are off. They have no rights to betting if they have no consideration for other people's rights. The only reason they're called rights is because they're things that society would consider right, rightful. and doing what you will on your property, society would typically agree that that's rightful. And even if it's not society that we're considering here, if it's your property and you have the rights to that property, then the right would come from you using your property in a way with which you agree.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, if you want the truth, I do think all rights fundamentally stem from property rights, in the terms of self-ownership, non-aggression, reasoned ethics.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so I'm guessing
Other
that
norms. I do think.
Uh-oh, I think.
Did we lose him?
Yeah, well, I think he's still here. We're just losing the feed a little bit.
Okay, well,
oh, you're back.
I'm back now. I heard some deadness on the line, but I kept talking. Okay, so what I said is that, if you wanted to be specific, yeah, I do think all rights stem from property rights, but I think that the initial property right is self-ownership, and that while all rights will stem from that, and all other property rights will stem from the control of one's labor and one's property based on that labor. I do think that that there are other useful norms, like for instance, I brought up Stefan Molyneux. He talked about the reasons not to accept the non-aggression principle, and he was against the concept of not accepting the non-aggression principle. He's an NAP advocate, and his response to that was that there was a principle additional to the, and it's the YAD principle, and it's called the "you're a dick" principle. If you don't do X, you're a dick, and society won't like you, and they won't treat you the same that they would other citizens. So, most people would be disincentivized from breaking the non-aggression principle, but they would also be disincentivized from being a dick, because then society wouldn't respect them anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the non-aggression principle, I don't think that's a way to just by saying, well, I live by the non-aggression principle my entire life. I don't think that's a way to build your life. I mean, that's the absolute bare minimum to not aggress against other people. I think to live a decent life, to build a good society, you need a little bit more than that. What that is, I don't know. I want to let the market decide that. I have what those ideas are in my head, and I think that most reasonable people would agree on what those are, but I guess that's me trying to imply that I'm a thin libertarian, since that's been a lot of discussion recently.
I'm a thin libertarian. Because that's one of the reasons I'm still favored for Cantwell, even though I disagree with a lot of what he says, because I don't see it as fundamentally to distance one's mind from the possibility of making very uncomfortable choices. And the idea of living in a society run by people who aren't willing to make very difficult choices isn't an idea I'm really willing to accept. And I think that this is probably why Gary Johnson said that the NAP goes over his head, because the idea of making this sort of analysis threatens a lot of people's base instincts to just say, well, is there a law against it? And I don't think he's willing to really rationally make a bunch of choices like that. And so I think he just wanted to be a coward and back his way out of the ethical discussion. And I think he succeeded in that. I think he was very much a coward, and that he backed his way out of that ethical decision. But I'm not willing to do that. I'm willing to say the uncomfortable things that may piss people off, that say, hey, as long as it's not aggression, it's fine, ethically. And I don't think he was willing to do that. I think really what was over his head was having a pair of balls.
Yeah, and I think what was going through his head was that he's like, all right, I'm in this, there's less than 100 people in this room. This isn't going to be on TV. Who the heck cares what I say? It's not going to matter. He probably already knew he had the nomination locked up, so
yeah.
Definitely. It didn't matter. So not to get off, because I love the conversation we just had, and it's funny because for a while I did find the non-aggression principle to be axiomatic, and then I got into humor stuff and said maybe it's not, and then now you gave me a lot of things to think about. So it's something I got to go back and review and figure out what I think now, because I think you brought up a lot of great points. But just to get back to the Gary Johnson thing, we're going to have this posted on the show notes page, but it's an Instagram picture that you have of the record of Gary Johnson. So I'm just going to read off real quick what his record is that you have listed. Wanted to ban burqas, but didn't after pressure. Won't talk about the non-aggression principle. It's over his head. Supports laws forcing business owners to serve people against their ideals. Has a gun-grabbing Veep. Won't say that taxation is theft. Supports fair tax. Only wants to legalize marijuana, but opposes the drug war. Has a strict zero-tolerance policy for violence on government officials, with nothing similar for violence on citizens. Supports NAFTA. Supports a gas tax. Refuses to take an ethical stance on the nuclear bombings of Japan. Still says he's the most libertarian candidate. So if you gave that record about anyone else, there's no way you'd be like, oh yeah, that's a libertarian.
Of course not.
So you weren't convinced by the baker should bake the cake but doesn't have to ice it?
That was the worst response I've ever heard for anything. It's just people who've never even heard of libertarianism or knew anything about libertarianism heard that response. I'm sure heard that response and said, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Sorry, I jumped in front of you, Jeremiah.
I've got a bunch of line interference. If you're asking me questions, I didn't hear the question.
Oh, sure. About when Gary Johnson was asked whether or not the Jewish baker should bake the Nazi cake, and he said, well, I think that he should be forced to bake the cake, but he shouldn't have to ice it with the swastika or whatever on it.
That wasn't convincing to you is the question.
Yeah, no, I don't support that modality because, first off, you can't run a society based on like bullshit little like discrepancies like that. If you really want to run a society in any meaningful sense, then you've really got to understand the minute workings of that society won't be to your liking. And so really what he's doing there is he's trying to say we can micromanage all lifeboat scenarios away. And if anything, that'll turn anybody who would be a libertarian toward the better micromanagers like a Trump or a Hillary, because he doesn't sound like he has an ass clue in Kansas how to be like. He sounds like he's the guy who the micromanager fires because he was stoned.
I think it was stoned a lot of times during the stuff. But yeah, I agree. I think that micromanagement steers people towards this kind of utilitarianism.
Yeah. I mean, you can have like the lifeboat thing like we just talked about, and you can talk about the minutia of it, and you can talk about how like, you know, the situation would be different if X, Y, and Z happened. But ultimately, you can't base a policy that affects an entire country on that unless you want very complicated legal codes which piss everyone off. And so you can, and simultaneously trying to have that sort of level of micromanagement and those very complex legal codes that piss everyone off, and also calling yourself a libertarian small government guy is going to raise a lot of eyebrows in the wrong direction, because it's going to get people to say, hey, you know, that guy doesn't sound too far different from the Republicans that we've had. Maybe he's just a Republican who likes to smoke weed, and we shouldn't elect him over this more reliable businessman with a constant track record. You know, maybe we shouldn't elect the guy who's going to call somebody he's competing against politically a pussy. You know, maybe we should have the guy who only says pussy in private when he doesn't think anybody's recording him. You know, and to make Trump look good takes work, and he worked that hard.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the future of the Libertarian Party? Do you have any? Do you think there's any good candidates, anyone
The
who can
whole
do a good
idea
job.
of the leadership of the good of the Libertarian Party sort of went out the window when they started to push Gary Johnson over any other candidate. In my view, anyway. But in terms of libertarians, I might be doing a bit of work to promote Kokesh for not president, because he's a more amusing take than Gary, and he's there to spread a message, not run for. Even if he gets in by some token of the elite's failures to understand something, and because they're the ones who really make the choice. They're the ones who really decide who's going to be the president, not the people. So because of that, it just went dead for a second.
Yeah.
So
You're still there.
So because of that, even if he did get in, his plan is to completely abolish the U.S. government, starting with the federal. And that sounds like an interesting proposition to me. So I won't vote for him because I don't vote, and I won't vote. But I might promote some of his ideas, and that is what's valuable. Not the party anymore, but the people who could pop the party, because there's no way he's going to get the nomination, but he could at the very least put up an impressive run in spreading the ideas during the first year he's acceptable age to be a president.
Yeah, well, he's definitely excellent at articulating the message, and he gets the word out very well. So,
except that he has terrible teeth. That's something I've constantly noticed. He has really bad teeth. It looks like he gnawed on his teeth.
With his gnawed on his teeth with his teeth.
I haven't noticed that.
And then put
but
them back
that
in.
make me look.
Well, yeah. Now
Yeah,
that's all I'm gonna be able to see. So thanks.
You're welcome. Just watch it sometime, especially when he's got his phone close to his face. It's harder to notice when it's further away, but I don't know. That's just an amusing thing. Trump has his mostly ugly physical demeanor, so I'm not saying like that would be a deal breaker based on like if he could win or not, but he does have very bad teeth.
That should be your reason why, and I agree with everything you said about promoting his message, but not actually voting for him. But you should just, as a good troll, to tell people that, like, go talking about his message and everything and all that stuff. Oh, so you're voting for him? Nah, I don't like his teeth.
Yeah.
Just to see how people would react to it.
Yeah. Honestly, I think he has a sense of humor that would jibe with that joke. So if I ever talk to him, I've got to see if I can slip that in and see if he's hostile toward it.
He does. He does
or
have
if he
a
ever
sense.
listens to this.
He does have a sense of humor. I've met him a few times, and it was at Liberty Fest a couple years ago, where a lot of us were going to, as what happens often with libertarians when they get in a group, they go and sing karaoke. And I don't think he actually came out with us, but we're at a restaurant, and I might have had a drink or two. And we're asking him, "What are you going to sing?" And he's like, "I don't know." Like, "I don't know. What are you going to sing?" And he said, "Freebird." And right in his face, I went, "Boo! Boo! Freebird, no!" And he laughed at it, and took it like a good sport. So,
yeah,
if he could take me being obnoxious, then I think he could take you talk about his teeth.
All right. So, anything else?
Just watch a video where he's on his phone sometime, one of his vlog updates, and you'll see what I'm talking.
Okay.
Anything else to add on Gary Johnson?
Well, I mean, he's a slime bag.
You didn't pick that up.
You look at his picture. He's got like on his campaign site that everything in that image that I made was the fonts, the colors, the background, the picture. Everything was from his campaign site. Everything down to the color of the letters and So, like, he chose that picture to convey consistent libertarianism, and he chose there's almost an inclination in my conspiracy brain to think that Gary Johnson was a psyop to make the other side look bad, because it would be so easy to just say, well, if that's what libertarians have, then I don't want it. And that sort of thing does not lend well to the party. but somehow it became, quote, the most successful person in liberty, the most popular, well-known libertarian, whatever. Because no, John McAfee has been known for longer than Gary Johnson has been in politics, I think, and he's like, he was a consistent libertarian on this ticket, so he could have possibly been the guy who pushed libertarianism to the forefront, especially since his campaign ads really sung with young people. And that's what you really need to do these days, is you need to appeal to the people who don't like politics. That's why Hillary had the meme shit and why Trump was a meme, you know, because, but Gary Johnson, I think he's a self-serving cunt because he dropped out. He could have not run, but instead he just wants to further his. I think he wanted to keep on the campaign trail, keep eating campaign dollars, and I think he's going to be a career politician because he certainly hasn't brought anything new to the table over the past, like, probably decade. And that to me is not the sign and signal of somebody who is a reasonable alternative. That to me is the sign and signal of somebody who's an intentional. And not to mention that, but, you know, it's not like the Libertarian Party will ever be the president because they're selected by the elites who decide everything at, like, Bilderberg meetings and shit like that. But the real point to this is the message spreading, and Gary Johnson can't fucking do it. And so, I'm really sick of people who can't fucking do it, being the representatives. That's why I don't like Austin Peterson either, because he, you know, the Canadian Libertarian Party had somebody running for a very high up position. I think it was like a prime minister in Canada or something. And he said this line, and it was really good. I want gay married couples to be able to defend their marijuana fields with automatic weapons, you know, and that sort of succinctly delivers the message of libertarianism, of we've got a bunch of unreasonable politics that need to be done away with so that we can have a brighter future that looks more peaceful, but is also willing to defend itself from aggression. And fucking Peterson, he co-opted this slogan and he just started repeating it. And he doesn't really think much for himself in the terms of libertarian thought. What he does is he picks up the populist messages and he tries to run with them, all with this jock juice persona that is constantly rude to people, and where he's now on the Republican Party ticket because guess what? The Libertarians didn't put him in. So, you know, Gary Johnson is like worse than that.
He really is a slug, and that was one of the disappointing things. He had 4 years to kind of like learn about libertarianism, and it seemed like he just digressed in those 4 years. So it's just someone who's not actually serious, and I agree. Someone who's not actually serious about liberty, but just about serving himself. That's all he cares about.
You know, not to mention the Libertarian Party is fucked anyway, and the reason it's fucked is because you have this fiscally conservative, socially liberal platform, which doesn't actually describe jack shit and doesn't really go into anything. And when it does, it has positions that people can sort of agree to maybe, but that if anybody in the Libertarian Party is more extreme, then people are like, oh, well, they're not libertarian. And that's fucking retarded. Like, the Libertarian Party, even I think, used to have the non-aggression principle as part of its platform. But now it doesn't. And people like Gary Johnson can get away with saying it. I don't understand it. Instead of, you know, even having a base understanding and some fundamental disagreements, he doesn't do it. He doesn't even engage with the conversation because he's a slime bag.
Yep. Well, he knows he doesn't have to. So why bother?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the problem. Right. And, you know, I get criticized for criticizing people in this harsher way because, you know, I'm a young person. I'm fucking 25, and like my positions are based on my knowledge of libertarianism, which albeit I learn more every day. But the more I learn, the less I like the Libertarian Party, and the less I'm satisfied with Gary Johnson. And I think that that's true of anybody who looks into libertarian policies, because if you go to the Mises Institute, they're not preaching that the non-aggression principle goes over people's head. They're explaining it thoroughly in many articles. And maybe that's the reason it goes over his head, because he'd rather read and masturbate to his fucking positive press than he would anything related to libertarianism and libertarian philosophy on its own. And I'm sure I'm being exaggerative here, but there is a loose possibility that I was 100% dead on that he masturbates to his positive press. But I'm certainly dead on about his policies not being libertarian. Murray Rothbard is rolling in his grave, and the idea of this person being a representative of a movement that's designed to trend people away from statism and toward anarchy as much as possible, being the kind of person who can't even agree that aggression is wrong, is the worst sort of milquetoast bullshit that can ever succeed in proving that it's significantly different to the status quo. And so the status quo will keep marching on, enabled by crutches like Gary fucking Windbag Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, that
sums it up. So
yeah.
How about we switch over to our free market story, lighten things up a bit after all our Gary batching.
Do you have something, Jeremiah? I'll give you I know we're putting you on the spot, but if you have anything, if not, that's okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you guys have covered this, but this is a relatively old story about, the Detroit threat management systems with this private police force that basically goes around and patrols for essentially free to the people who can't afford to pay, and charges like very low rates for personal protection. And they cropped up because the police department in Detroit is the opposite of reliable. And if you call them, Stossel did an experiment, I think, and he called them and he waited 2 hours until they got there, and they weren't even willing to do anything. I think he waited 2 hours. Actually, wait, no, that was I'm combining two stories. He waited two hours and then gave up. And that's like absurd on its face. But the good news, the free market success, well, I don't like calling it the free market personally because it's not free, but the sort of agorist alternative, I guess you could say, would be the Detroit threat management systems, Vipers Threat Management, which popped up and now deals with the majority of the security and crime. And the police force can actually do their job now because there's another group of people supplanting their work. And what would be really good is if institutions like that became the police and totally supplanted them, forming them. They don't murder civilians. They have a policy of trying to de-escalate situations and not firing until fired upon. And they don't have a huge track record of abuses or complaints, and they generally have good service because people buy the service. So people are protected by an actual protection service that's a private sector thing. That's more of an agorist alternative to the public sector thugs that the government sends around to collect revenue.
Yeah, and don't they get very creative about the ways they stop things? I remember hearing a story. And so, and that's part of what the market will do. You have to keep innovating or you're going to go away. You can't do your old tricks. And so, it's a really cool story. Maybe we should link to some of the people who are doing that in Detroit.
Yep.
There's a Tom Woods Management has a website.
And there was a Tom Woods episode where he had the founder on it. It was a great episode. And I think even in Oakland, private security forces are popping up because the police just give up over there. So, and I know that's a big thing that you go after, Jeremiah. And I think that's the best angle to try to do it, is that we it's not really about secession and forming breaking away from the federal government and forming another state. It's about creating alternatives. And so that people rely on the market providing that, and agorism providing that is probably the better term for it, like you said, instead of just thinking that the state's the only one that can handle it.
Agorism is the market. It's just
Right.
it's counter economics. It's not saying that there's a free market that this is participating in. It's saying that there's an unfree market, so we have to go with black and gray markets to get what we really need. That's what I think his name is Samuel Edward Konkin III founded agorism based off of, because he couldn't he couldn't really jibe with the Rothbardian thing of create a more controlled market that's a capitalist one, because he fundamentally thought capital was part of the problem. He was a leftist, and so he split off and he started this agorist movement, and it turned into, because agora is the marketplace, and the purpose of agorism is not to say that there isn't a market. It's to say create markets that supplant the markets of coercive nature, and that's I believe you're referencing the Borders thing when you talk about that.
How'd you guess that?
Yeah, but so if you want to talk about that, you can, but yeah, like you wouldn't want a bunch of smaller controlling parties connected to one another. That would just mean more borders and more difficult ingresses into territories and egresses from them, and it would expand. Oh, sorry, it's very hot, and I have no water right now. It would expand the state because it would expand their powers into local markets. It would expand their power into towns and cities and wherever else these borders stopped, to say that we've seceded from the Union as well. And that's what the U.S. government knows. That they know it would be much more complicated, but they know that it would be much easier to control. And other than that, these governments would still be making deals with one another, and so the only thing it would basically be doing would be saying that we're defederalized, which doesn't actually prevent any of these governments from being more abusive and corrupt than they otherwise would be. So yeah, borders suck, even if they're smaller.
Absolutely, I agree with you there. So do you want to tell the audience where they can find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm Insanity is Free on Twitter. I have a show called Moment of Rage with Jeremiah Harding on IPMNation.com and JournalisticRevolution.com that goes up every Wednesday. And I sell shirts. I'm on Facebook, fucking everywhere. If you want to find something associated with me, you can find me in one place, and I'll probably give you links to the rest of them. And smash the state. Fuck those fuckers.
We'll have all that stuff posted on the show notes page, as long as some information on Gary Johnson. I'll have the video posted where he said the non-aggression principle went over his head. I have another article that I wrote about why he needs to be jettisoned from the libertarian movement, and also the that infographic that Jeremiah has on Instagram, as well as the normal stuff like following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, and subscribing to this podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, as well as subscribing to our newsletter. All these things you can find.
Fuck Gary Johnson.
I second that. All these things you can find on McFlugel.com. So thanks for listening. Next week is actually our 1-year anniversary. This was our 52nd podcast episode, which means it was the 52nd week. Next year is
cool.
the beginning of year number 2. So thanks, Jeremiah, for helping us close our first year out. It was an honor to have you on. It was a blast. I thought it was just going to be all Gary Johnson bashing. I didn't realize we were going to get into a little mini debate about the non-aggression principle, but it got me to think, and maybe to change my mind. And I hope it got the listeners thinking too, because it was good stuff.
Definitely follow him on Twitter. He's active and tweets a ton of good stuff. That's at Insanity is Free.
All right. Well,
and yeah, whenever you want me on again to discuss like any aspect of like Austrian economics or libertarian philosophy, just hit me up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good. We'd love to have you back. It was a great conversation. And I'd like to hear some of your conspiracy theories in the future.
Oh yeah, definitely. If you ever want to really hit the tinfoil hard, I'll tell you first how to make a good Faraday cage, because tinfoil hats are not good.
That's what I want.
All righty. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Peace.